All right, today we're diving into one of the wildest literary mysteries of the 20th century. We're talking about a best-selling book of poetry where every single author was supposedly dead. Let's get into the incredible story of Parnassus from beyond the tomb. I mean, think about that for a second. What if death wasn't the end of a poet's career? It's a pretty out there question, right? But that's the exact idea behind a book that completely shook up Brazil, making people question everything they thought they knew about life, death, and even poetry itself. So, picture this. It's 1932 in Brazil, and this book just appears. And we're not talking about a little pamphlet here. This thing was a hefty collection packed with 259 brand new poems. It was about to cause an absolute sensation. In the title, Parnasso de além túmulo. It literally means Parnassus from beyond the tomb. Now, if you know your Greek mythology, you know Mount Parnassus was the home of the Muses, the source of all poetry and art. So this book was basically claiming to be a broadcast, straight from the afterlife. A pretty bold claim, to say the least. And get this, the list of authors was just staggering. We're not talking about a few unknown writers. The table of contents listed 56 of the most famous, most beloved poets in the entire Portuguese language. Guys like Castor Alves, Olavo Bilac, these were legends, literary giants, and they were all dead, some of them for decades. Okay, so if these dead poets were the authors, who was the messenger? Who was the person actually claiming to get these poems from the other side? Well, this is where the story goes from strange to absolutely extraordinary. Just listen to a line from one of the poems. Rest now, vibrio of the ruins. Forget the worm, the flesh, the dung. Wow. It's dark, it's complex, it's got this weirdly scientific, morbid vibe to it. This poem was attributed to the spirit of Augusto dos Anjos, a poet who was famous for exactly that kind of unmistakable style. So, who could possibly be writing like this now? The person who supposedly transcribed this poem, and all the others in the book, he was just 21 years old. A young man named Francisco Cândido Xavier, though most people just called him Chico. And here is the absolute kicker. Chico Xavier wasn't some literary prodigy. He had zero training. He came from a really poor family, and his formal education, it stopped after primary school. He was working as a clerk, long hours just trying to help his family make ends meet. In fact, in the preface to the book, Chico himself described his own life. He said his world was always alien to literature, a place of poverty, discomfort, of arduous duties. He literally said it was a place where one cannot think of letters. It just wasn't a part of his world. So that brings us to the big question. How? How on earth could a guy with his background produce a work of such literary complexity? Well, the explanation given was a phenomenon called psychography. Psychography, or as some people call it, automatic writing. The basic idea is that the person writing, the medium, isn't the author at all. They're just an instrument, kind of like a pen being held by an invisible hand. And Chico's own description of what this felt like is just fascinating. He said he felt like a vigorous hand was impelling his own. Other times, it was as if he was just reading and copying from some immaterial volume right in front of him. He claimed to feel totally separate from the actual creation of the poems. And this really drives home the idea that he was just a channel. He often said he didn't even understand the words as they were coming out. He and his friends would have to grab a dictionary afterwards just to figure out what some of the super sophisticated words even meant. Okay, so naturally, people were screaming fraud. I mean, you would, right? So how did the book's supporters defend it? Well, their main argument wasn't about faith or belief. It was actually about literary analysis. The argument, which they laid out right in the book's preface, was pretty powerful. They basically said, look, no single person could possibly master this many different and conflicting styles. The book just seamlessly shifts from, say, the intense emotion of romanticism to the hazy ideas of symbolism. It was like having dozens of different authors in one book. And their Exhibit A was the poet we mentioned earlier, Augusto dos Anjos. His style when he was alive was totally one of a kind, all morbid, scientific, and pessimistic. And the new poems? They were a dead ringer. They had his signature obscure vocabulary, his unique worldview. It was a style that many literary experts thought was literally impossible to fake. So that really became the heart of the debate. What's more unbelievable? That a 21-year-old clerk with only a primary school education was secretly a literary forger of unimaginable genius? A guy who could perfectly imitate 56 different master poets? Or that the book was exactly what it claimed to be? But beyond all the controversy and the literary mystery, this book had a much deeper purpose. It wasn't just about the poems. It was about a spiritual message, one that would echo for generations. See, no matter which poet was supposedly writing, the poems all came back to one central idea: hope. The message was that life goes on, that consciousness continues after death, and that we're all on a journey of growth. There's this amazing quote from a later edition, supposedly written by the spirit of another famous writer. It says that the so-called dead speak to the world, because the institutes of civilization have been powerless to solve the problem of our being and our destinies. Basically, the book was positioning itself as an answer to the biggest questions we all have. And this book, it was just the start. Parnassus was the very first of, get this, more than 450 books that Chico Xavier would go on to publish. Novels, philosophy, science, all of it attributed to spirit authors. And the whole time, he never took a single penny for himself. All the royalties went straight to charity. So yeah, this one book of poetry was the launch pad. It took Chico Xavier from being this unknown clerk and turned him into one of the most influential spiritual figures in Brazil's history. He became a huge part of the Spiritist movement and was loved by millions as a humanitarian. Which brings us back to the big mystery. What was it? The most incredible literary hoax ever pulled off by some hidden genius? A real deal miracle? A connection to another world? Or maybe it's some deep psychological phenomenon that we just don't have the science to understand yet. In the end, it almost doesn't matter where it came from, beyond the tomb or from the deepest parts of one incredible mind. The book itself stands as proof of our deep human need to believe that the story doesn't just end. It really makes you wonder, what is the real source of creativity and inspiration?